The mining station Kepler 442b hung in the void like a metallic parasite, feeding on the asteroid belt's riches. Captain Zethkar of the Hegemony watched the human settlement through his ship's viewports, his 4 arms crossed in what his species considered deep contemplation. The humans had been here for barely 3 cycles, yet they had already extracted more rare minerals than the Hegemony's previous operations managed in 20. "Disgusting efficiency," muttered his second-in-command, Vrex. The reptilian officer's scales shifted from green to a muddy brown, betraying his unease. "How do such primitive beings accomplish what we cannot?" Zethkar's mandibles clicked in agreement. The humans were a young species, barely having achieved faster-than-light travel 2 of their centuries ago. They possessed no advanced energy weapons, no quantum shields, no gravitic manipulation technology. Yet somehow, their mining yields exceeded every projection the Hegemony's finest scientists had calculated. Intelligence reports suggest they use something called intuition, combined with what they term stubbornness, Vrex continued, reading from his data pad. "Our xenobiologists cannot quantify either trait." The captain's primary eyes focused on a small figure moving between the massive excavation equipment. Even from this distance, he could see it was smaller than the adult humans. A youngling, perhaps. The humans were known to bring their offspring to frontier settlements, another inexplicable behavior that violated every civilized species' protocols for dangerous environments. "Sir, we have our orders," Vrex reminded him. "The High Command wants this system cleared of human presence within the next solar rotation. They're interfering with Hegemony expansion plans." Zethkar nodded slowly. The humans had established their settlement in direct violation of Hegemony territorial claims, despite multiple warnings. Their ambassador had simply smiled and said something about finders keepers before refusing to evacuate. Such insolence could not be tolerated. "Begin the operation," Zethkar commanded. "But remember, we want minimal casualties. The Galactic Council still maintains humans have protected status due to their recent emergence. We'll make it look like a mining accident." The Hegemony assault cruiser, Claw of Dominion, began its descent toward the asteroid mining platform. Below, human workers continued their shifts, unaware that their presence had been deemed inconvenient by a civilization that had ruled this sector for over 3,000 years. Among those workers, 12-year-old Marcus Chen helped his father calibrate the deep core extractors. The boy had an unusual gift for understanding the asteroid's mineral patterns, often pointing out promising veins that the adult geologists had missed. His father, Dr. James Chen, was the settlement's chief mineralogist and had brought Marcus along during the school break, believing the hands-on experience would benefit his education. Marcus paused in his work, looking up at the stars through the transparent aluminum dome that protected the mining platform. Something felt wrong. He couldn't explain it, but the same instinct that helped him find valuable ore deposits now whispered warnings. "Dad," Marcus called out, "are we expecting any ships today?" Dr. Chen looked up from his instruments, following his son's gaze. A dark shape was growing larger against the star field, its hull gleaming with the characteristic blue-black metal of Hegemony vessels. "No," Dr. Chen said, his voice tightening. "We're not." The settlement's communication array crackled to life as Administrator Sarah Voss's voice echoed across the platform. "All personnel, this is command. We have an unidentified Hegemony vessel approaching. This is likely routine enforcement. Continue normal operations, but be prepared for inspection protocols." Dr. Chen frowned. The Hegemony rarely conducted routine inspections this far from their core territories. He was about to voice his concerns when the approaching ship's weapons ports began to glow with charging energy. "Marcus, get to the emergency shelter," Dr. Chen ordered, his parental instincts overriding everything else. "Now!" The boy started to protest, but the urgency in his father's voice silenced him. Marcus ran toward the nearest emergency station as the first energy beam struck the platform's outer sections. The transparent dome cracked, but held, its emergency systems engaging to maintain atmospheric pressure. Aboard the Claw of Dominion, Zethkar watched the initial strikes with satisfaction. The human platform's shields were pathetically weak, barely registering on his vessel's sensors. A few more targeted shots would disable their primary systems, forcing an evacuation that would look like a response to catastrophic equipment failure. "Sir," his weapons officer reported, "their communication array is still active. They're broadcasting distress signals." "Disable it," Zethkar ordered. "We don't want them calling for help before we're finished." The next barrage struck the platform's communication hub and primary power generators. Emergency lighting activated throughout the facility as backup systems struggled to maintain life support. In the chaos, evacuation alarms began blaring. Marcus had reached the emergency shelter when the lights went out. The shelter was a reinforced compartment designed to protect workers from asteroid impacts or equipment explosions. As he sealed the door behind him, he could hear adults shouting orders and the screech of metal under stress. Through the shelter's small viewport, Marcus watched hegemony soldiers in powered armor breach the platform's hull. They moved with mechanical precision, herding the human workers toward the escape pods. It should have been a relief. They were being evacuated, not slaughtered. But something about their movements seemed wrong. One of the soldiers was placing devices throughout the facility. Marcus had studied enough about mining operations to recognize demolition charges. They weren't just evacuating the humans. They were planning to destroy everything, including him. In the chaos of the evacuation, no one knew he was in the emergency shelter. Dr. Chen fought against the hegemony soldiers trying to push him toward an escape pod. "My son!" he shouted. "My son is still here somewhere." The soldier restraining him spoke through a translation device. "All humans will be evacuated. Resist, and you will be stunned and carried." "You don't understand," Dr. Chen pleaded. "He's just a child, 12 years old. He could be anywhere on this platform." The soldier's helmet turned toward him, and for a moment Dr. Chen thought he saw something like consideration in the alien's posture. Then the soldier spoke into his communication device in his own language before responding. "Automated scans detect no additional human life signs. Your youngling has already been evacuated." Dr. Chen knew they were lying, but the soldier's grip was implacable. He was forced into an escape pod with other workers as the final evacuation sequence began. In the emergency shelter, Marcus watched the last escape pod detach from the platform. His father's face was visible through one of the pod's viewports, twisted with anguish and frantically pointing back toward the platform. Marcus tried to activate the shelter's communication system to signal his location, but the hegemony's initial attack had severed most of the platform's internal networks. The demolition charges would detonate in minutes. Marcus was trapped. He looked around the shelter desperately. It was designed to protect against external threats, not internal explosions. The charges the hegemony had placed were positioned to collapse the platform's main support structures. Even if the shelter survived the initial blast, it would be crushed when the facility tore itself apart. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to think. His unusual intuition had helped him find mineral deposits by understanding the hidden patterns in rock formations. Could the same ability help him find a way out of this situation? He opened his eyes and began examining the shelter's construction with new focus. The designers had built it to survive the worst-case scenarios they could imagine, but they hadn't imagined deliberate sabotage. However, the shelter was connected to the platform's emergency systems, including the automated mining equipment. If he could access those systems. Marcus pulled out his father's emergency toolkit and began working on the shelter's control panel. His small fingers were better suited to the delicate work than adult hands would have been. Within minutes, he had bypassed the safety locks and gained access to the platform's automated mining systems. The deep core extractors were still operational, running on backup power. More importantly, They were designed to operate in the vacuum of space. If he could program them to create an escape route through the asteroid itself. His fingers flew over the controls as the demolition charges ticked down toward 0. He would have one chance to get this right. Aboard the Claw of Dominion, Zethkar watched the escape pods fleeing toward the system's outer planets, where they would be picked up by human rescue vessels within a few hours. The operation had proceeded flawlessly. Soon the platform would be destroyed, and the hegemony could claim the entire asteroid belt without human interference. "Charges will detonate in 30 seconds, his weapons officer reported. Zethkar allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The humans were resourceful and determined, but they lacked the experience and technology to challenge a species that had dominated the galaxy for millennia. This minor inconvenience would soon be resolved. The charges detonated exactly on schedule. The mining platform's superstructure buckled and began collapsing in on itself, exactly as their engineers had calculated. Debris scattered in all directions as the facility's artificial gravity failed, and emergency atmosphere bled into space. But something was wrong. Long-range sensors were detecting unusual seismic activity within the asteroid itself. The readings made no sense. It was as if something was tunneling through the rock at impossible speeds. "Sir," the sensor operator called out, "I'm reading massive tectonic shifts inside the asteroid. The mining charges shouldn't have caused this level of destabilization." Zethkar moved to the sensor station, his mandibles clicking with concern. The display showed the asteroid's internal structure, and what he saw defied explanation. Something was carving a path through solid rock, following the mineral veins with surgical precision. "It has to be some kind of automated mining system," Vrek suggested. "Perhaps the humans set it to activate if the platform was destroyed." But Zethkar had studied human technology extensively. They had nothing capable of this kind of operation. Their mining equipment was powerful but crude, requiring constant supervision and maintenance. This was something else entirely. The seismic activity was intensifying, and now the asteroid itself was beginning to shift position. Something was destabilizing its orbital mechanics from within. The gravitational effects were already being felt by the surrounding asteroids in the belt. "Sir, we need to withdraw," the navigation officer urged. "The entire belt is becoming unstable. If this continues, we'll be caught in a gravitational cascade." Zethkar hesitated. Retreat would mean admitting that a human operation had somehow survived their attack and was now threatening hegemony forces. Such an admission would damage his career and his species' reputation. But the alternative might be the destruction of his ship and crew. "Begin withdrawal," he ordered reluctantly, "but maintain long-range sensors. I want to know what the humans are doing in there." Inside the asteroid, Marcus Chen was discovering that necessity truly was the mother of invention. His desperate programming of the automated mining systems had created something unprecedented, a coordinated network of extractors working together to carve a survival shelter deep within the asteroid's core. The mining equipment hadn't been designed for this kind of operation, but Marcus's intuitive understanding of the asteroid's structure allowed him to guide the machines along natural fault lines and mineral veins. Instead of fighting the rock, they were working with it, using its own geological patterns to create a stable refuge. As the surface platform collapsed above him, Marcus found himself in a growing cavern surrounded by the steady hum of mining equipment. The automated systems were using the asteroid's own resources to expand his shelter, creating atmospheric recyclers from metallic ores and power generators from radioactive deposits. But it was more than just survival. As Marcus worked with the mining systems, he began to understand something profound about the asteroid belt itself. The rocks weren't just random debris from the system's formation. They were connected in ways that human science had never recognized. Every asteroid contained traces of every other asteroid. Microscopic particles exchanged through countless impacts over millions of years had created a vast, interconnected network. By tapping into that network through the mining equipment, Marcus was accessing something that was almost like a nervous system spanning the entire belt. And that system was waking up. The gravitational disturbances detected by the hegemony were just the beginning. As Marcus's automated systems spread through the asteroid, they began resonating with similar mineral deposits in neighboring rocks. The effect was subtle at first, but it was growing stronger with each passing minute. Marcus didn't fully understand what was happening, but his instincts told him it was important. The hegemony had tried to destroy him and his people's homes simply because they found human presence inconvenient. They had treated human life as something disposable, unworthy of consideration. Perhaps it was time they learned that actions had consequences, and that even a 12-year-old human child could set forces in motion that would change everything. As the claw of Dominion retreated to a safer distance, Zethkar watched the sensor readings with growing unease. The disturbances were spreading throughout the asteroid belt, following patterns that defied every model of gravitational mechanics his scientists had ever developed. Something was very wrong, and he was beginning to suspect that the humans were far more dangerous than anyone in the hegemony had ever imagined. 3 days after the attack on the mining platform, the ripple effects were being felt across 17 star systems. What had started as localized gravitational anomalies in the Kepler 442 asteroid belt had somehow spread along ancient hyperspace routes, creating disturbances that defied every known law of physics. Admiral Korthak of the hegemony's 7th Fleet stood before a holographic display showing the affected regions, his usually perfect composure cracking as reports continued to stream in. Entire trade routes had become impassable as space itself seemed to fold and twist in impossible ways. 3 hegemony installations had lost power simultaneously, their advanced fusion reactors simply shutting down for no apparent reason. "Explain this," Korthak demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having the universe make sense. "How does a minor mining operation cause system-wide disruptions?" Chief Science Officer Veltar, a member of the crystalline Jethkri species renowned for their logical minds, manipulated the display with trembling appendages. "Admiral, the pattern suggests some form of quantum entanglement cascade, but on a scale we've never observed. It's as if the attack on the human settlement triggered a response from something." "Something?" Korthak's secondary eyes fixed on the scientist with predatory intensity. "Be more specific." "Sir, our models indicate that the disturbances originated from the asteroid where the human mining platform was destroyed. But that's impossible. The asteroid was completely sterilized. Nothing could have survived our bombardment." Deep within that very asteroid, Marcus Chen was learning that survival was more than just staying alive. The mining equipment he had commandeered was no longer simply creating a shelter. It had become something unprecedented, a fusion of human intuition and automated precision that was reshaping matter at the molecular level. The cavern around him had grown into a complex ecosystem. Atmospheric processors hummed quietly in alcoves carved from living rock, while hydroponic gardens grew from mineral nutrients extracted directly from the asteroid's core. But most remarkably, the mining systems had begun to replicate themselves, using the asteroid's abundant resources to create more advanced versions of their own technology. Marcus watched in fascination as a constructor unit assembled what looked like a communication array, but unlike anything human engineers had ever built. The device seemed to grow rather than being built, its components forming naturally from the asteroid's crystalline structures. When it activated, Marcus felt a sensation he couldn't describe, as if the entire asteroid belt was suddenly aware of his presence. More than that, it felt as though the belt was pleased. The sensation of approval was so strong it made him dizzy. Through this new connection, Marcus began to understand the true scope of what was happening. The asteroid belt wasn't just a collection of random rocks. It was the remains of a planet, shattered eons ago in some cosmic catastrophe. But the pieces had never truly separated. Quantum entanglement on a planetary scale had kept them connected in ways that conventional science couldn't detect. His desperate use of the mining equipment had somehow activated dormant quantum pathways, awakening a distributed consciousness that had been sleeping for millions of years. The asteroid belt was remembering what it used to be, and it was angry about being disturbed. But it wasn't just angry at the hegemony. The awakening consciousness was making contact with other shattered worlds, other planets that had been destroyed by warfare or natural disasters throughout galactic history. A network of quantum-entangled debris was coming online across multiple star systems, and each node was sharing information about the species that lived among them. The verdict on the hegemony was not favorable. Meanwhile, Dr. James Chen was aboard the rescue vessel New Horizon, coordinating search efforts for his missing son. The escape pods had been recovered safely, but Marcus was nowhere to be found. The destroyed mining platform showed no signs of survivors, and long-range scans detected only cooling debris. "We have to go back," Dr. Chen insisted for the 100th time. "He's still alive. I know he is." Captain Sarah Martinez, the rescue vessel's commanding officer, looked at him with sympathy, but also with the weight of responsibility for her entire crew. "James, we've scanned every piece of debris larger than a spacesuit. The asteroid itself is showing massive internal instabilities. If we get too close..." She was interrupted by the communication officer's urgent report. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the asteroid belt. It's coming from inside the primary asteroid." Dr. Chen was at the communication station before anyone could stop him. "Marcus? Marcus, can you hear me?" The response came not through normal radio frequencies, but somehow directly through the ship's quantum communication array, a system that should have been impossible to access without the proper authorization codes. "Dad? I'm okay. More than okay, actually. I need to tell you something important. The hegemony didn't just attack us. They woke something up, and it's not happy about what it's learned." Captain Martinez stared at her instruments in disbelief. "That's impossible. Our quantum comm system is military-grade encryption. No one should be able to access it without understanding quantum mechanics better than we do," Dr. Chen finished, a mixture of pride and terror in his voice. "Marcus, what have you done?" "I survived, Dad. But I had help. The asteroid belt is alive in a way. It's been sleeping for millions of years, but the mining equipment woke it up when I programmed it to save my life. And Dad, it's not just our asteroid belt. They're all connected. Every destroyed planet, every shattered world, they're all part of the same network." Across hegemony space, the implications of Marcus's discovery were becoming terrifyingly clear. On the core world of Hegemon Prime, the ruling council convened an emergency session as reports flooded in from across their territory. High Archon Zekthar, supreme leader of the hegemony for the past 40 years, reviewed the data with growing alarm. The quantum disturbances had affected 17 star systems and showed no signs of slowing down. Worse, they seemed to be specifically targeting hegemony installations while leaving other species' territories completely untouched. "It's as if something is deliberately interfering with our operations," reported Intelligence Director Vorthak. "Our fusion reactors are failing, our hyperspace routes are becoming unstable, and our communication networks are suffering random blackouts. But the Terran Federation, the Centauri Republic, and even the savage Orc clans are completely unaffected." Archon Zekthar's primary manipulator appendages drummed against his throne's armrests, a gesture that had signaled displeasure for generations of hegemony leaders. "And this began precisely when Captain Zethkar attacked the human mining operation?" "Yes, Archon. The The correlation is undeniable. Then we eliminate the source, Zekthar declared. Dispatch the Annihilation Fleet to the Kepler system. If the humans have somehow developed a quantum weapon, we destroy it before it can spread further. What the hegemony leadership didn't understand was that they were already too late. The quantum network Marcus had inadvertently activated wasn't a weapon. It was a judgment system that had been waiting for the right catalyst to come online. Every destroyed world in the galaxy's history held memories of what had killed it. Some had died in natural disasters, solar flares, or asteroid impacts, but far too many had been destroyed by the deliberate actions of aggressive species seeking Lebensraum or resources. And the hegemony had been responsible for more such destructions than any other civilization in galactic history. The shattered remains of those worlds were now sharing their memories, comparing notes on the species that had ended their existence. A distributed consciousness spanning thousands of destroyed planets was reaching a unanimous conclusion about the hegemony's guilt. But it wasn't just about past crimes. The network was also evaluating current actions, judging species based on their behavior toward others. The hegemony's attack on a mining settlement populated by families, including children, had been the final piece of evidence needed to render a verdict. Marcus felt the network's decision like a physical weight settling across his shoulders. He was the catalyst, the human child whose near death had awakened sleeping giants across the galaxy. Now those giants wanted justice, and they were looking to him for guidance on how to deliver it. The responsibility was overwhelming, but Marcus remembered his father's teachings about ethics and consequences. Dr. Chen had always stressed that power came with the obligation to use it wisely, to consider not just immediate effects, but long-term implications. "I need to talk to the hegemony," Marcus announced, his 12-year-old voice somehow carrying the authority of entire worlds. Before this goes any further, they need to understand what they've done and what's going to happen if they don't change. The response from the quantum network was a mixture of amusement and skepticism. These sleeping worlds had seen countless civilizations rise and fall. They had witnessed genocide, planetary sterilization, and the casual extinction of entire species. The idea that the hegemony might be capable of redemption struck them as naive. But Marcus was still human, still a child who believed that people could choose to be better. He insisted on giving them the chance. The message Marcus composed was sent simultaneously to every hegemony installation in the galaxy, bypassing their security systems as if they didn't exist. It appeared on displays throughout hegemony space, transmitted in perfect high hegemonic, despite Marcus having no knowledge of their language. "This is Marcus Chen, survivor of the attack on mining platform Kepler 4422b. I am speaking for the quantum consciousness network of destroyed worlds throughout the galaxy. The hegemony has been judged for its crimes against sentient life, both past and present. You have 72 standard hours to begin withdrawing from all occupied territories that do not belong to you by right of settlement rather than conquest. You will release all enslaved species and pay reparations for the worlds you have destroyed. Failure to comply will result in the permanent shutdown of hegemony civilization." The message concluded with a demonstration of the network's power. For exactly 60 seconds, every piece of hegemony technology in the galaxy simply stopped working. Starships hung motionless in space, unable to activate their engines. Planetary defense systems went dark. Even personal communicators and data pads ceased to function. Then, as suddenly as it had stopped, everything came back online. The message was clear. This wasn't a bluff or a threat. It was a statement of fact from entities with the demonstrated ability to carry out their ultimatum. High Archon Zekthar stared at his throne room's primary display, where the human child's words hung in glowing text. Around him, his advisors maintained shocked silence as they processed the implications of what they had just witnessed. The temporary shutdown had affected every single piece of hegemony technology simultaneously. The precision required for such an action was beyond anything in their scientific understanding. Whoever or whatever was behind this possessed capabilities that made the hegemony's advanced technology look like primitive tools. But more than the demonstration of power, it was the nature of the demand that shook Zekthar to his core. The human child had demanded nothing less than the complete restructuring of hegemony civilization, the abandonment of everything that had made them the galaxy's dominant power. It was unthinkable, inconceivable. The hegemony had ruled for 3,000 years because they were superior, stronger, more advanced than the younger races. To bow to the demands of a single human child would be the end of everything they had built. Archon, Intelligence Director Vorthak ventured carefully. Perhaps we should consider the possibility of negotiation. The power they've demonstrated is irrelevant, Zekthar interrupted. The hegemony does not negotiate with terrorists, even if they have somehow acquired quantum weapons. We will not abandon 3 millennia of civilization because of the tantrums of a single youngling. But even as he spoke the words, Zekthar could see doubt in the eyes of his advisors. The demonstration of power had been too precise, too comprehensive to dismiss. Whatever they were facing, it wasn't simply an advanced weapon. It was something fundamental, something that challenged the very foundations of their understanding of the universe. The Archon made his decision. Deploy the Annihilation Fleet immediately. Target the Kepler system and everything within a 50-light-year radius. If we cannot control this power, we will ensure it cannot be used against us. But as the hegemony's most powerful fleet began its journey toward human space, the quantum network of destroyed worlds was already preparing its response. Marcus Chen's attempt at mercy had been rejected. Now the shattered planets would have to speak in a language the hegemony would understand. The language of consequence, written in the collapse of civilizations that chose conquest over coexistence. Marcus felt the network's sadness as it prepared for what was to come. For millions of years, these destroyed worlds had hoped that younger species might learn from the mistakes of their predecessors. Instead, they had watched the same patterns repeat endlessly: aggressive expansion, exploitation of weaker species, and the inevitable collision with forces beyond their understanding. The hegemony had just chosen to become the latest entry in a very long and very tragic list. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to prepare himself for what his survival had set in motion. He had wanted to save his own life, but in doing so, he had awakened forces that might reshape the galaxy forever. In 71 hours and counting, the hegemony would learn what it meant to interfere with a human child when all of creation was watching. The hegemony Annihilation Fleet numbered over 3,000 vessels, each one capable of sterilizing entire worlds. As they approached the Kepler system, their sensors detected something that should have been impossible. The asteroid belt was moving with purpose, reorganizing itself into geometric patterns that defied natural physics. Admiral Torvash commanded the fleet from the bridge of the dreadnought Universal Dominion, a vessel so massive it had its own artificial gravity generators and could dock smaller ships within its hull. He had overseen the destruction of 17 rebellious worlds during his career, and he approached this mission with the same cold efficiency that had made him the hegemony's most feared military commander. "Status report," he demanded, as his fleet took positions around the human system. "Sir, long-range sensors are detecting massive structural changes in the asteroid belt," his tactical officer reported. "The rocks appear to be arranging themselves into some kind of formation." Admiral Torvash studied the holographic display with growing unease. The asteroids were indeed moving, but not in response to gravitational forces. They were positioning themselves with mathematical precision, creating patterns that resembled circuit boards or neural networks on a massive scale. "Irrelevant," he declared. The humans may have discovered some method of manipulating local gravity fields, but rock formations cannot withstand antimatter bombardment. Begin the assault. I want every asteroid in this belt reduced to component atoms. But as the Annihilation Fleet opened fire with enough destructive power to crack planets, something unprecedented happened. The energy beams simply stopped. They didn't impact barriers or shields. They ceased to exist entirely, as if the universe itself had decided that the concept of directed energy no longer applied in this region of space. "Sir," his weapons officer called out, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Our primary batteries are non-functional. Energy readings show normal charge levels, but the beams dissipate before reaching their targets." Admiral Torvash felt the first stirrings of genuine concern. In 3 decades of military service, he had never encountered a defense system that could neutralize antimatter weapons. The energy requirements alone should have been impossible for any known technology. Deep within the primary asteroid, Marcus Chen watched the fleet's futile attacks through sensors that had grown far beyond human engineering. The quantum network had transformed his refuge into something that was part command center, part living organism. Crystalline displays showed him not just the immediate battle, but the responses of destroyed worlds throughout the galaxy. They were angry. Millions of years of accumulated grief and rage were focusing on this moment, this choice by the hegemony to answer diplomatic outreach with overwhelming violence. The network had hoped for wisdom from the younger species, but instead found the same aggressive arrogance that had characterized every galactic empire in history. "They're not going to stop?" Marcus said aloud, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to himself or to the vast consciousness that surrounded him. "They think this is just another rebellion to crush." The response came not in words, but in shared understanding. The network had reached its decision. The hegemony would serve as an example to every other species in the galaxy about the consequences of choosing conquest over coexistence. But the network wanted Marcus to understand exactly what that meant. Images flowed through his consciousness, not just of the hegemony's past crimes, but of what would happen to the species if they were completely cut off from advanced technology. Billions of hegemony citizens lived on worlds that required constant technological support. Without their fusion reactors, atmospheric processors, and gravity generators, those worlds would become uninhabitable within days. It would be genocide on a scale that dwarfed anything the hegemony had ever committed. "No," Marcus said firmly, surprising himself with his own conviction. "There has to be another way. Most of their people are innocent. They're just living their lives, following leaders they probably don't even like." The network's response was tinged with something that might have been amusement. Such mercy was uniquely human, a perspective shaped by a species that had learned to value individual life over abstract principles. Other civilizations spoke of honor, efficiency, or logical necessity. Only humans consistently chose compassion when it would be easier to choose justice. "Then what do you propose?" The question came in Marcus's own voice, but he knew the words originated from the collective consciousness of destroyed worlds. Marcus thought about his parents, about the miners who had worked alongside him, about the hegemony soldiers who had carried out their orders without question. Most beings in the galaxy were just trying to survive and protect the people they cared about. The real problem wasn't the species themselves, it was the systems of power that encouraged aggressive expansion and dehumanization of other civilizations. "We change the rules," Marcus said finally, "not by destroying them, but by making their current way of life impossible while offering them something better." Through the quantum network, Marcus reached out to touch every piece of hegemony technology in the galaxy simultaneously. But instead of shutting it down, he began to modify it at the fundamental level. Weapons systems found themselves incapable of targeting civilian populations. Starship engines began to malfunction whenever their vessels entered, claimed territory of other species without permission. Most importantly, the advanced fusion reactors that powered hegemony civilization began operating at only 60% efficiency whenever they were used to support military operations or colonial exploitation. The effect was immediate and galaxy-wide. The Annihilation Fleet found their engines cutting out as soon as they attempted to approach inhabited worlds. Their weapons could still function, but only against legitimate military targets that posed direct threats. Civilian transports and unarmed installations were completely immune to hegemony firepower. On Hegemon Prime, High Archon Zekthar watched his empire's military capability evaporate in real time. Reports poured in from across hegemony space describing the same phenomenon. Their technology still worked, but only for defensive purposes and legitimate trade operations. "This is impossible," he declared, though his words carried less conviction than before. No force in the universe has the ability to selectively modify technology on this scale. But even as he spoke, Zekthar was beginning to understand that his assumptions about the universe had been fundamentally wrong. The humans hadn't developed a weapon. They had somehow awakened something that had always existed, something with perspectives and capabilities that rendered conventional military thinking obsolete. Intelligence Director Vorthak approached the throne with visible reluctance. "Archon, we're receiving communications from our colonial administrators. Our colonial extraction equipment has suffered a 90% efficiency loss. Only operations that involve partnership with local populations or fair resource sharing agreements are functioning normally." The implications hit Zekthar like a physical blow. The hegemony's economy was built on resource extraction from conquered worlds. If their equipment would only function under conditions of voluntary cooperation, their entire economic model would collapse within months. "Sir," Vorthak continued, "there's more. Our military academies report that their training simulations now refuse to run scenarios involving civilian casualties or territorial conquest. The computers display error messages saying, 'Scenario violates fundamental ethical protocols.'" For the first time in his 40-year reign, High Archon Zekthar felt the weight of genuine powerlessness. Whatever force the humans had awakened, it wasn't content to simply defend against hegemony aggression. It was actively reshaping the fundamental parameters of galactic civilization, making warfare and exploitation not just difficult, but literally impossible to sustain. In the Kepler system, Admiral Torvash was reaching the same conclusion as his fleet hung motionless in space, their engines refusing to function in attack configurations. His communications officer was receiving messages from across hegemony space, all reporting the same systematic failure of military operations. "Sir, we're being hailed by the human settlement," the officer reported. It's the same young voice from the earlier transmission. Admiral Torvash straightened his uniform and activated the communication array. If he was going to face defeat, he would do so with dignity. "This is Admiral Torvash of the Hegemony Annihilation Fleet. I assume you're prepared to dictate surrender terms." The response came from a 12-year-old human child whose voice somehow carried the authority of cosmic forces. "Admiral, I'm not interested in your surrender. I want to offer you a choice." "What choice could you possibly offer? Your quantum weapons have rendered our military capabilities useless." "That's not what this is," Marcus replied. "What you're experiencing isn't an attack on your civilization. It's an upgrade. Your technology now operates according to new parameters. Parameters that make it impossible to use for aggressive conquest or exploitation of other species." Admiral Torvash frowned. "You expect us to accept limitations imposed by aliens?" "I expect you to accept reality. Your species has been trapped in a cycle of expansion and conflict for 3,000 years. It's brought you power, but at what cost? How many of your people are happy? How many live in fear of rebellion or invasion? How many spend their lives maintaining an empire that benefits only the ruling class?" The Admiral fell silent. Marcus's words struck closer to home than he cared to admit. Torvash had joined the military because his home colony couldn't support its population without constant resource imports from conquered worlds. He had spent 30 years enforcing a system he didn't believe in because the alternative seemed to be economic collapse. "Your technology still works," Marcus continued. "Your ships can still travel between stars. Your colonies can still be maintained. Your people can still prosper. The only difference is that your prosperity now depends on cooperation instead of domination, trade instead of theft, partnership instead of conquest." Through the quantum network, Marcus was simultaneously having similar conversations with hegemony officials across the galaxy. The message was consistent. The old rules that allowed stronger species to prey on weaker ones had been permanently changed. But the new rules offered something better: sustainable prosperity based on mutual benefit rather than zero-sum competition. On Hegemon Prime, High Archon Zekthar faced the most difficult decision of his reign. He could continue to resist the changes, dooming his civilization to slow economic collapse as their exploitative systems failed. Or he could accept the new reality and try to guide the hegemony toward a different kind of future. The choice was made easier by reports from hegemony colonies that had already begun experimenting with the new parameters. Worlds that entered into voluntary partnership agreements with their local populations found their industrial efficiency actually increased. Collaborative research projects produced better results than forced exploitation. Most surprisingly, hegemony citizens on these cooperative worlds reported higher satisfaction levels than those still operating under traditional colonial models. The quantum network wasn't just preventing aggression. It was actively rewarding cooperation with enhanced technological performance. Species that worked together found their combined capabilities exceeding what either could achieve alone. "Draft a message to all hegemony territories," Zekthar finally ordered. "We are suspending all military operations pending a comprehensive review of our colonial policies. Effective immediately, all territorial governors are authorized to enter into voluntary partnership agreements with local populations." It wasn't a surrender, but it wasn't defiance either. It was the first step toward a future that none of them had imagined possible. In his crystalline chamber deep within the asteroid, Marcus felt the quantum network's satisfaction as the hegemony began to adapt to their new reality. It wasn't the complete transformation he had hoped for, but it was a beginning. Other aggressive species across the galaxy were watching these events and drawing their own conclusions about the changing nature of galactic politics. Dr. James Chen's voice crackled through the communication array, filled with pride and concern in equal measure. "Marcus, are you ready to come home? Your mother is worried sick, and I think you've done enough universe changing for 1 week." Marcus smiled, feeling 12 years old for the first time since the attack. "Almost, Dad. There's just one more thing I need to do." Through the quantum network, Marcus reached out to touch the consciousness of every destroyed world in the galaxy. For millions of years, these shattered planets had carried the grief and anger of entire civilizations, waiting for the chance to speak for those who could no longer speak for themselves. Now they had been heard. The cycle of aggressive expansion that had characterized galactic politics for eons was ending, not through violence, but through the simple recognition that cooperation produced better results than conquest. The destroyed worlds began to sing, a harmony of quantum frequencies that carried their stories across space and time, ensuring that their experiences would never be forgotten. Future species would know the cost of choosing domination over partnership, and they would have the tools to make better choices. When Marcus finally emerged from the asteroid 3 days later, he found himself surrounded by ships from dozens of different species. Word of the hegemony's transformation had spread quickly, and everyone wanted to understand how a 12-year-old human child had changed the fundamental rules of galactic civilization. But Marcus just wanted to hug his parents, and maybe get some real food instead of the asteroid's mineral-based nutrition systems. The quantum network would continue its work, gently guiding galactic civilization toward more cooperative models. The destroyed worlds would continue singing their stories, ensuring that the lessons of the past were never forgotten. And somewhere in the depths of space, the hegemony was discovering that their new limitations came with unexpected freedoms. Without the need to constantly expand their territory or suppress rebellions, they could focus on improving the lives of their existing citizens. Without the burden of maintaining exploitative relationships with other species, they could develop genuine partnerships that benefited everyone involved. The universe was learning what Marcus had always known, that the strongest connections weren't built through domination, but through understanding, cooperation, and the simple recognition that every conscious being deserved respect and consideration. The child who had survived the destruction of a mining platform had given the galaxy something more valuable than any resource that could be extracted from an asteroid: hope that intelligence and compassion could triumph over aggression and greed. And across the quantum network of destroyed worlds, ancient grievances were finally beginning to heal as their sacrifice gained meaning through the protection of future generations. The consequence of interfering with a human child had indeed been felt by all creation, not as punishment, but as the promise of a better tomorrow for every species wise enough to embrace it.